Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you are doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, today we are going to take a quick look at Familiar Tales. And of course, this is the new game from Jerry Hawthorne and Plaid Hat Games. I should thank Plaid Hat Games for sending me a copy of Familiar Tales to review. And I should also let it be known that I am a good online friend with Jerry Hawthorne. However, those of you who have watched my review of Aftermath know that that does not prevent me from being critical of his games. Because while Aftermath is a game that I like a lot, I had a lot of problems with the way the rulebook was presented and with how the game onboarded its players, how the game pulled the players into the game. I thought it struggled a lot with that. I'm very, very happy to say that Familiar Tales has none of those issues. Familiar Tales does approach that magical dungeon dive space of being effortless fun. And a lot of that has to do with the simplicity of the game, but it doesn't sacrifice any good decision making for that simplicity. And that also has to do with the way that the tutorial in the app walks you through the process of learning the game. And additionally, the rulebook is also pretty dang good. This is probably the best Plaid Hat rulebook I have seen since Dungeon Run. It does a good job of explaining the game, of explaining the materials, of having you set up the game and what everything means. There's a lot more text in this rulebook than there was in Aftermath, and it is better for it. And it really doesn't take all that much time to read. However, you can also learn most of the game just by playing through the first scenario in the game with the tutorial turned on in the app. And speaking of the app, yes, this is an app-based game. So if you don't like app-based games, just skip the video. Nothing I'm going to say is going to change your mind. But the app is just a web page, which is really nice. You don't have to download anything. Everything is on the web page. And it is a very good app. It has great implementation. It adds a lot to the game. It acts as the game master. It keeps track of enemy turns and surprises you when the enemies are going to go. It keeps track of your overall danger level. It keeps track of some campaign progress, some of your choices. It has good options. You can make the text bigger or smaller. You can go back. It has a history. So a very, very well-designed app. And it also has good sound effects.
Had lurked in its location for over a century, but had laid vacant and decomposing for nearly a quarter of that.
The entire thing is voice acted. The voices are very good. The sound effect is very good. This is clearly one of the best app integrated board games that I have played, and I think the game is made better because of that app. Let's take a look at the back of the box here and talk a little bit about the kind of game that Familiar Tales is. So this is called a story crafting game, and it really is a logical evolution of the kinds of games that Jerry Hawthorne has been making for a very long time, starting with Mice and Mystics, then moving up through Stuffed Fables, moving up through Comanauts, and then Aftermath, and now Familiar Tales. And I think this is the game where he and his cohorts at Plaid Hat have really perfected this design. And I am hoping that this is the template from which they will work on all future games in this style. So this says this is a story crafting game. Magical creatures vie for the fate of a child. Familiar Tales is an exciting narrative game where players take the role of a wizard's familiars, entrusted with saving and raising a displaced princess. They must keep her safe from the evil forces that would see her dead. But when it comes to children, it is not enough to merely survive. The familiars know that every choice they make will affect the young one in their care. If they are victorious and the throne is reclaimed, what kind of woman will sit upon it? Familiar Tales is a campaign game. However, I do think that the campaign is short enough that I'm actually going to finish it. Have a very similar feeling towards the campaign of Familiar Tales that I did with Sleeping Gods. It seems totally manageable, and it also seems like one that I will want to finish and go back and play again to see how my choices impact the overall outcome of the game. So the game is played over a series of 3 different eras, and I think this is a really cool idea. A lot of time transpires in the game's narrative because in this game, you are going to be playing as 4 familiars. You will be playing as Flicker, Blaze, Gribbert, and Chalk. And you always play with 4 familiars. However, there is a really good solo style or solo variant that is in the book, and I will talk a little bit about that in just a minute. But in the game, as the 4 familiars, you are going to be entrusted with the care of this baby. And the baby, throughout the different eras, will grow into a young child and then into a young woman. And depending on the choices you make and how you care for the child growing up, certain things might happen as she grows up. Starts as a baby, and this is the baby card here. And when she is the baby, you do have to carry her. So there is some escort mission type things, but it doesn't feel real cumbersome. It doesn't feel like you are being saddled with a chore, which is really nice. And as things happen to the child, to the baby, to the child, and to the woman as she is growing, you will have to help maintain the mood of your companion. And depending on the age of the child, you will be using this discontent card here. And certain things might trigger depending on the mood of the baby. For instance, if the baby's crying a lot and you can't feed her and you can't soothe the baby could end up alerting guards to your presence, and that could have disastrous effects on the mission. Speaking of disastrous effects, though, this does employ a fail forward method. This is something that Jerry has been working with a lot lately. You don't just have to sit and replay a mission over and over again until you beat it. You can move forward without beating it. However, when you do poorly, you might take points of misfortune that will also change the outcome of the game. So the game is played with an app, and the app will correspond to these travel nodes. Each era has its own campaign sheet. So we have Era 1, Era 2, and Era 3. And on your campaign sheet, you will be keeping track of certain keywords. So this does employ a keyword system like something like Sleeping Gods or Fabled Realms. Or Fabled Lands, I should say. And I do really like that because at certain points you will learn a keyword and a number, and you can type that number into your app, and it will open up a new way for you to interact with the board or a new way to have some interactions with NPCs or things like that. And you will also keep track of your progress of how you are traveling across the land here. So as you can see, I've moved from the start of Chapter 1 up to the bridge over Silverling. And then I've moved over to Frog's Crossing, onto the Druid Stones, and at the Old Mill. I'm just about ready to go to this final mission of Rest Assured. However, I've skipped these 2 missions, Road Trip and Hidden Gully. Somehow I made a choice that led me down this path rather than that path. So there are things to get you to go back and play the campaign again, to make different choices, to experience different quests. And there are branching paths in each of the eras. So I do think that this is a campaign game that does have some pretty good replay value. And like I said, I think the campaign is short enough where you are going to get through it. And, if you were able to play this game for a couple hours each night, like after work, I think you could get through it in a week. It might be a little bit longer than one time through a campaign of Sleeping Gods, but it's not something like Madara or Gloomhaven where you're going to be playing for a month or 2 months just to see the end of the game. So when you select your different node, you will type that node's number into the app, and then it will tell you a story. You will have different ways to interact with that app. And then the app will tell you to turn to the adventure book here, the encounter book, or what is it called here? The location book, I should say. And this location book will be familiar to anybody who has seen Stuffed Fables or Aftermath. And it will tell you everything you need. It'll have the map on the left page here. And the map is broken up into spaces. And I love the way that the movement works in this game. To cross a single dotted line is 1 point of movement. And so if there are two dotted lines, then that is 2 points of movement. The double solid lines block movement and line of sight. And line of sight is done very easily. Each one of the spaces has a little dot in it. And if you can connect the dots without passing through a double solid line, you have line of sight. Very easy, very concise. It still has a little bit of tactical positioning, but nothing to get in the way of the flow of the fun. And then each of the locations on the right-hand side here will have all of your special setup, your special encounters, and your special rules for this scenario. The monsters, the enemies are not on cards in this game. They are represented on the page in the book. And you even keep track of your enemy's health by using these red tokens on the page. And it gives you all of the enemy's stats and their loot and everything that you need to have those encounters. And as you can see, as you play through the encounters, very quickly, the special rule pages do start to fill up. And it gets progressively more complex pretty quickly, but it does so in a way that introduces things to you in a manageable way. And I really do appreciate that. This is the map that I am on now, and there's a lot more going on this map than there was on the first map, but I feel like I'm able to handle it, and it flows very easily. I do want to show you a few pages, though, of the left-hand side of the maps, just so you can kind of see what's in store. Because when I was flipping through this book, I was getting very excited about the kinds of adventures that I was going to be going on. And that is one thing that has enticed me to continue playing the game, because I'm like, oh man, I just cannot wait to get to these other locations, because they are so cool. You can see just lots of fantastic locations that you will be going through. All kinds of very beautiful high fantasy settings and dungeons and all kinds of things. Really well done. I think the art in the game is fantastic. And it really does just make me want to continue to play, just so I can see what there is to discover. Finally, with the location guide, I do want to talk a little bit about how some of the maps can be used in multiple ways depending on how you approach them in the narrative. So on this map here, I actually started on flag B and the enemies were on flag A. However, there's also a startup where the enemies, or where the heroes would start over here and the enemies would start in a different place. And that depends on how you approached this particular location within the narrative. You might have a different way to interact with the map. Different spaces might do different things depending on how you approached the map and based on the choices that you made in the narrative. And I think that is very, very cool. So the game itself, the way it plays is a lot like Aftermath, in that you are going to be using a deck of cards to pass skill challenges, to move, and all of those kinds of things. I think this is a better system than Aftermath, and I do really like it. And it does utilize one thing that I know Jerry has been a huge proponent of for a long time, and that is multi-use cards. So when you take a skill check, there's going to be 4 different kinds of skill checks. You can have might, agility, blocking, or insight. That's for like melee and strength tests. That's for range and agility tests. This is used for when an enemy attacks you. This is used for searching or kind of intelligence tests. And then each card also does have a movement value, and you can spend cards to do points of movement. And so if you wanted to pass a strength test of 5, you could play a certain number of cards from your hand to get up to that value that you need. And then finally, you would augment that final value with a fate die, which could subtract 1. It could add a point of danger. It could add 1 or 2. Danger, the app will keep track of danger. Every time you get a point of danger, you have to add one to the app. And once you reach certain thresholds, certain bad things will happen. The more danger you have, the more apt the enemies are to be alerted to your presence, and other things can trigger depending on your danger level. Additionally, these cards also have special actions at the bottom, and these special actions can be played in order to trigger certain special actions that certain characters might have, or certain actions that all of the characters might be able to participate in. And then finally, these skill cards have these icons up here. And each time you play a card for a skill test or for movement, those are going to trigger these icons up here, which will perform combos. You might have icons up here that correspond to different icons on your gear or on your character cards, and those will allow you to do certain things. You might have these chain link icons. If you are playing with more than one player, those allow other players to play those cards to help you out on a skill test. If you are playing solo, then every time you play one of these cards, you get to draw an additional card from your own deck, so you can kind of have a little more options on your turn. There's also these cards here, which will allow you to draw an additional card from your deck. But in order to do so, you have to take a fatigue card in your deck. And fatigue cards are just kind of not so great cards that clog up your deck. And they also, when played, will add a point of danger to your danger total. So at the beginning of the game, you are going to have a starting deck of cards. Each character has their own starting deck of cards. However, when you play as in the solo mode, you combine all 4 decks of cards into a single deck, removing a few cards, and then you use a single super deck to control all 4 of your characters. So you don't have to manage a single deck for each character. I really do like this. It does add a little bit of complexity, or a little, not complexity, but it adds an element of challenge, because you might be dealing with fewer cards in your hand than a whole table full of 4 players would be using. However, it is augmented by you having complete control over what your characters are doing, and kind of like perfect strategy as far as planning goes. I really like that, because I do not like multi-hand card games, especially solo. The most I ever want to do is 2. So I was a little afraid of this game of having to control 4 different characters, but using one deck and the characters are simple enough that I think it really does work, and I have been having a lot of fun doing that. Finally, for the skill cards, finally, I guess, there are also these Storycraft cards and Bond cards. And those can be purchased along with other cards, which can be purchased with this value here as your characters go up in power, which is basically experience points. You can buy new cards to add to your deck. So there is a light deck building element to the game. But there are also these story cards and these bond cards. And when you get those are going to trigger certain numbers that you will cross off on your campaign journals. And then those are going to be things that you can look up in the app to have certain interactions with other characters, and you can get special bonuses for using those in the game. Another thing that you can do throughout the game is you will be able to forage for items, for materials, for mats in the game. And we have all different kinds. There's like food and mushrooms, foliage, wood, textiles, gems, or ore and gold. And on each map, there's going to be certain nodes where you can search for these items. You can take those items, and then you can utilize those items utilize those materials in order to craft items, such as different kinds of potions or weapons or armor. And as you're playing through the different eras of the game, each era has its own decks of cards that you will be adding to the existing decks of cards. So when you go into era 2, you will be adding in a whole bunch of new skill cards that you can buy, and a whole bunch of new item cards that you can craft by using those materials. And then there is one other small deck of cards that also grows as the eras progress, and those are these various artifacts. And these are special items that I haven't found any yet, but I imagine that these are going to be story-specific items that you will be acquiring as you progress through the location book and through the various quests in the game. So yeah, there is a heck of a lot to love in Familiar Tales. It is a game that is absolutely charming. I have loved every moment I've spent with the game so far. It's a very nice looking game. It is a pleasant game to play. It is entirely enjoyable. Even though I liked Aftermath and Stuffed Fables and Mice and Mystics, there were moments in all of those games that were somewhat frustrating. I have not felt that with Familiar Tales. I have felt nothing but joy while playing this game. It is one that I am looking forward to playing a lot more of. I actually had to physically break myself away from finishing chapter 1 just to make this video. I've been playing all day, and I was, okay, I need to stop playing so I can get to work. And it was one of those games that like Sleeping Gods, it's hard. It was hard for me to get away from the game, and I'm already thinking about diving back in. I really want to see how at least how this chapter 1 ends. And depending on how I'm feeling, I might put the game on hold and I might play it with my wife and our 2 friends, because I think it is a game that group will really, really love. If you are a fan of kind of lighthearted fantasy, of beast epics, of fairy tales, and you are a fan of adventure games and dungeon crawls, and you like these kind of lighter campaign games, and you don't mind application-based games or games that use an app for some things, then I really can't see you not liking Familiar Tales. It is a game that has a heck of a lot to offer, and it is approaching it. I'm not going to say it's effortless fun yet, but it is quickly approaching that space for me. And I'm curious to see how I feel once I pack everything up and then unpack it and get it back to the table and start playing again. I think at that moment, I will know if it really is effortless fun, but I think it is going to be that. And I really can't wait to get back to playing Familiar Tales. So, all right, guys, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.